The recent brutal crackdown of pro-democracy demonstrators on Myanmar's streets drew condemnation from around the world. But in Asia, at least, words are failing to turn into hard action. At the time of the protests, the Association of Southeast Asian Nations expressed their revulsion at the military junta's violent suppression of the protests. Strong language, but ASEAN's refused to suspend the country from the organisation and has refused to impose sanctions. The UN Special Envoy, Ibrahim Gambari, has been to Myanmar and is rallying neighbouring countries to help resolve the crisis there. I'm Veronica Pedrosa. On this edition of 101 East, we speak to Ibrahim Gambari. Thank you very much indeed for joining us. Ibrahim Gambari, United Nations Secretary General, Special Envoy to Myanmar.
It's my pleasure.
Today, the Myanmar government in its state newspaper has said that the arrests of more people involved in the protests last month will continue. They seem to be ignoring the calls from around the world and from the Secretary General himself to stop these arrests. What's your response?
I joined the Secretary General and the rest of the world in calling on the authorities in Myanmar to stop those arrests and to release as soon as possible those who are in detention, because we feel very strongly that the solution to the immediate crisis and to meeting the challenges facing the country will not be served by those continuing arrests. On the contrary, we feel that there's need for dialogue between the government and the opposition so that together they can try to find solutions to the challenges facing the country.
Doesn't this make your job difficult, though? Do you think they're ignoring what you're saying?
I sincerely hope not, because I have been treated with great courtesies. So far, I'm probably the only international interlocutor to have been received in the country 3 times, May and November last year and early this month, and also been allowed to see each time Aung San Suu Kyi, including twice during my last visit. So I believe they put enormous value on this, but this then has to be translated into very concrete action, because the good office role of the Secretary General, requiring patience, persistence, also has to deliver concrete results.
So you will not be put off by something like this. But how is your trip around the region going? You're trying to gather support, a consensus for your mission.
Because it's very, we were encouraged by the way ASEAN spoke up during the crisis. But it's important to maintain the consensus within ASEAN behind the objectives of the Secretary General's Good Office's mission, which is to get a peaceful, prosperous, democratic Myanmar with full respect for the human rights of its own people, because after all, Myanmar is a member of ASEAN, and ASEAN is an important partner with the United Nations, not only on this issue, but on several others.
Right, but ASEAN has been criticized in the past for not being hands-on enough on the issue of Myanmar. Do you feel that now you are getting the support that you need?
Yes, but we can always do more. They can always do more, we can always do more, because the situation is urgent. The threat to the values that we all share are urgent, and that is why the Secretary sent me to the region, not for the first time, but after the crisis, recent crisis, to come back here. And I've met so far the leadership of Thailand, of Malaysia, and I'm going now to Indonesia, and subsequently to India, China, and Japan.
When you say more, what exactly do you mean? There was a proposal by Thailand's Prime Minister for the possibility of 4-party talks, which sounds really very interesting. Is that something that you think could work?
That was not a United Nations idea. It was mentioned, but it's up to Thailand to persuade its ASEAN countries, member countries, and of course Myanmar, to see whether or not this is the best way forward. What we are looking for is expression of continuing support for the position which the United Nations has taken, which is an early resumption of dialogue between the government and the opposition, so as to together address the challenges facing the country.
So what is your sense? Are the two sides ready for dialogue? During a recent briefing, you mentioned that the offer, although it was with conditions, from the SPDC was an opportunity that needed both sides to use maximum flexibility. Does that mean that you think that the NLD should consider going into talks despite the conditions?
Oh, very strongly. The Secretary spoke very clearly when he said there should be resumption of these or commencement of this dialogue without conditions. And I believe that is the right approach. A Malaysian foreign minister also made the same comment, among others. Now, we feel that there's a window of opportunity that has opened, and it's not possible, in our view, to return to the status quo ante. It's not sustainable. And therefore, this opportunity should be seized. I believe that Aung San Suu Kyi herself has always been in favor of dialogue, but her own conditions, as it were, are first, that this dialogue should be time-bound. Secondly, they should be serious. And thirdly, she had suggested that a liaison officer, she has accepted our suggestion that a liaison officer be appointed promptly so as to prepare the ground for such dialogue. I'm encouraged by the fact that within a week of my visit, the authorities appointed Okti, the deputy labor minister, and elevated him to the rank of minister to be in charge of relations. Now, our hope and expectation is that this signal should be seized by both sides and used to commence this discussion. And if there's any way we as the UN can be helpful in kickstarting this process, we'll be delighted to take it.
Have there been any talks between the two sides? I understand you were shuttling between the two sides, passing messages. And there was a long time lag between talks taking place before and the world knowing about them. Are there talks going on at the moment?
I don't know for sure, but we hope so. We hope the sooner the better. And that is why I'm hoping to go back to Myanmar. We are discussing now the possibility of an earlier return. I have an invitation to return to visit Myanmar by the second week of November, but that was before the crisis. But I hope that we can, whatever we can do to really kickstart this process, we will do as you. And in this, we have full support of the General Assembly of the President of the General Assembly of the United Nations. There's full support of the Security Council and the full support of ASEAN countries.
Yes, it seems quite an encouraging sign that you're going earlier, it seems, than you had originally planned in mid-November. But the United Nations engagement is not just about the dialogue, of course, getting the dialogue initiated. It's also about humanitarian concerns. Even before this crackdown, it was estimated that something like 1,500 political prisoners were being detained behind bars. Nobody really knew where or under what conditions. 1 in 4 people lives on $1 a day. A third of children are malnourished. How can you balance humanitarian concerns with this very delicate task that you have of initiating dialogue?
Well, because before the crisis, I had had discussions with several key countries: United States, Russia, India, China, Japan, the European Union, United Kingdom, France, and others, to develop a comprehensive approach towards engaging the authorities in Myanmar under the context, or in the context of the good officer's role. And we got a lot of support for that, to say, yes, our #1 priority is the release of political prisoners, including especially Aung San Suu Kyi, a faster pace of democratization and respect for human rights, but also humanitarian access to those in need of help, the cessation of hostilities against the ethnic minorities, The issue of drugs, the issue of child soldiers, forced labor, and the Millennium Development Goals and the needed investment in education and health. Also, the issue of the 3 Diseases Fund, whereby even some of those countries most critical of the human rights record of Myanmar authorities are putting money together to support efforts to address HIV/AIDS, malaria, tuberculosis. So a whole range of issues. And that's still on the table. But the crisis kind of interrupted that engagement with the authorities, and we hope we'll resume it, so that the good office role of the Secretary General that I am pursuing on his behalf will be an umbrella around which we can then fit all these offers of engagement with the authorities in Myanmar.
It does sound like people want, you have a plan rather, for more assistance in return for tangible steps towards democracy. But doesn't that mean that you're going to have to engage, or countries around the world are going to have to engage in adequate and long-term support? Who's really signed up?
Well, I was very encouraged by 2 days ago an op-ed piece by Foreign Minister Kouchner of France and Miliband of the UK, in which they said that in addressing the situation in Myanmar, we should go beyond sanctions, and that consider some, not carrots, but incentives, positive incentives. And then Prime Minister Gordon Brown of the UK recently spoke along the same line. So there seems to be traction. Also, the European Union, in their recent ministerial meeting, also suggests that this should be the path. Now, the UN is to encourage all efforts, particularly those aimed at addressing the real needs of the people of Myanmar who are suffering. There's real hardship, and we're encouraging the government of Myanmar to really set up a mechanism for addressing the legitimate concerns of the ordinary people, their social and economic conditions, and also their discontent on the political front.
You talked about traction in your answer there. You talked about momentum. I was thinking about your role in contributing to the traction. During the Northern Ireland peace talks, former Prime Minister Tony Blair provided the traction. Often the traction comes in the form of one person. Former President of South Africa, Nelson Mandela, provided the momentum, the commitment, single-minded commitment to ending apartheid in South Africa. Are you the man to do this for Myanmar?
No, my role is much more modest. I'm an instrument and in effect a messenger of the Secretary General, who in turn gets his mandate from the General Assembly. I just feel that having developed what appears to be trust on both sides, I want to maintain that, but not as an end by itself, but to ensure that we get the kind of movement and the results that we deserve. But I'm an agent of the Secretary General of the United Nations.
We'll take a break here on 101 East, but we'll be back with more from the UN Special Envoy to Myanmar, Ibrahim Gambari.